Our press, our speaker today is Jane Wagner-Tyack, who lives in Lodi and who has been following water issues in San Joaquin County for a very long time because she used to work with Restoring the Delta, or a group called Restore the Delta, which focused on protecting fisheries and farming in the San Francisco Bay Delta and estuary. And while working on those issues, she became familiar with the California League of Women Voters, and she is co-director for the League of Women Voters of the state of California for the Water Committee. And our state league has a long relationship with California's environment and environmental justice non-governmental organizations. And so this is how she got her start in this. And she has done a lot of work in terms of teaching. And we are very pleased to have her here today to talk to us about our water system, where it comes from and where it goes, and the sustainability of it all, and to answer all our questions about water, which we always seem to have quite a few.
Okay, well, how
And we
long
used
do
to
you
be,
have?
an aside, Jane, but we used to be sponsored by a water group in that was out of Oakland, and Ruby McDonald, who's a past president, who's attending the meeting today. Her son was the editor of a newsletter that they used to publish, and they dealt a lot with water
Is
issues.
that holy H2O?
Was that it, Ruby?
No,
No,
I don't think
it
so.
was a
Okay,
monitor.
that's all right. Okay, so shall I start?
Yes.
Okay, well, the way this happened is that in January, oh shoot, I got to figure out how to advance. There we go. In January, I did a California water update for the National League CIG, the Climate Interest Group Water Team, and Carol invited me to share information on the subject with you. So I realized I could build a presentation on the PowerPoint slides that I used last June at the League convention as a lead-in to Felicia Marcus's presentation on water and climate change. If you were there, you'd recognize the maps, but I'll have more commentary and some updates right now. And I also added a slide. And my advanced thing isn't working the way I was used to, but here we go. I think let's take a look at this full map. I hope that you can, yeah, this should be okay. This is a Water Education Foundation map that I really love. It's 24 by 36. I have it pasted on foam board but that's not real, portable for this kind of purpose. So I took pictures of different parts of it with the Water Education Foundation's permission to create segments for an online presentation. But I wanted us to start by looking at the geography of the whole state. On this map, irrigated areas are green. Now let's just see if here we go. Irrigated areas are green. Certainly the Central Valley out here between the Coast Ranges down here in the Imperial Valley and some other places. The Salinas Valley. Urbanized areas are brown, hard to see, but up here's Sacramento, here's the Bay Area, Los Angeles, there are Bakersfield's down here, Fresno, and so on. And of course, there are very few places in California where people don't live, including the Mojave Desert. But these urbanized areas are the places where we have a concentrated need for water for cities and for general municipal and industrial uses. Much of California, of course, is forested. But notice too how much is desert. And that's one of the things about this map that I really appreciate. We got a lot of desert here. And with our Mediterranean climate, even areas that get water part of the year don't get it throughout the year the way people do in other parts of the United States. So this is a good lead into my first update on Clean Water Act matters. In 2023, the U.S. Supreme Court issued a decision in a case between Idaho landowners named Sackett and the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency, and this decision is widely referred to as Sackett. In response, the EPA updated its definition of waters of the U.S., also referred to as WOTUS, in a way that leaves unprotected many waters and wetlands that were once considered covered by the Clean Water Act. The amended definition of what are called nexus waters removed from protection many of the streams and small tributaries, but also especially in a dry area like ours, washes, arroyos, and also wetlands that are seasonal in California, even before considering climate change. The League supports clean water protections. They've done that since the middle of the 20th century. And the EPA's updated WOTUS definition is opposed by the League nationwide. At the end of December, LWVUS submitted comments to the EPA, and I've included a link to that letter on the last screens of this presentation. And by the way, Carol, were you able to put those links I sent you into chat? Oh, I can't hear you. I sent Carol a bunch of hyperlinks. I put them at the end of the presentation.
No, I did not have access to chat before now, but I sent them to Candia and she's going to put them in chat.
Oh, excellent. Thank you, Candia. Okay. I put them at the end, but that wouldn't be a really convenient way to access them. So I figured chat would be easier. Okay, so the letter's in chat, and it summarizes this whole situation with waters of the U.S. beautifully. It was produced by people on the LWVUS Climate Interest Group water team, as well as California League members, including Diz Swift and Mary Okiki, Shirley Nixon, and Sue Keidel. Meanwhile, the California League is supporting SB 601 by Southern California State Senator Ben Allen. It's called the Right to Clean Water Act. It was introduced last year to preserve protections of waters covered by the Federal Clean Water Act by codifying protections in California law. And it's sponsored by California Coastkeeper Alliance and Defenders of Wildlife. The League is part of the coalition of 122 organizations that support that bill. So back to looking at California just kind of generally, you can imagine what it was like when people came here in the 19th century, what it looked like. It looked a lot like we see if we go up and down the Central Valley or out through the Coast Range here. Yellowed grass much of the year, scattered trees. Of course, there would have been wetlands, and it would have been green around all the rivers that come down from the Sierra Nevadas and from the north. But it would make sense for new people coming to California to look for ways to make it green the rest of the year and agriculturally productive in as many places as possible. Because remember, these were people who were coming from parts of the country where, not all of them, but many of them coming from parts of the country where it rains throughout the year. So east of San Francisco, an inland delta had been formed for a long time from the Sacramento River coming south, the San Joaquin coming north into this delta. And beginning with the Swampland Act in 1850, people who were abandoning the gold fields began to turn the delta into farmland. It didn't require moving any water. What they did have to do is redirect it with levees. So next slide here, let's see. Here we go. Okay, so this is from the Water Education Foundation, and I hope you have your screen arranged in a way where you can actually read all the notes on the right-hand side of the screen. In 1913, San Francisco began work on the Hetch Hetchy Reservoir to store Tuolumne River water for use in the expanding area around San Francisco. So that's our first here, the Hetch Hetchy system coming from the Tuolumne area. And it was the first project that started reducing flows through the Sacramento-San Joaquin Delta and the Bay Delta estuary. Today, the San Francisco Public Utilities Commission has an urban water management plan. And in February of this year, Sierra Club California and two regional Sierra Club chapters wrote to the SFPUC arguing that the Commission's draft 2025 Urban Water Management Plan is using unrealistically high demand projections that threaten ratepayer affordability, as well as the Tuolumne River ecosystem and the Bay Delta. So that's an interesting letter to get a look at. It has a lot of really good detail about demand, how demand is calculated. Going back to the early part of the 20th century, also in 1913, the Los Angeles Department of Water and Power, the LADWP, began building the Los Angeles Aqueduct to bring water down the east side of the Sierras from Owens Lake originally, and then when that was dry, from Mono Lake, which is also very damaged now, to bring it down into Southern California, into the Los Angeles area. In 2024, it looked like DWP had made a commitment to lowering water diversions to protect Mono Lake, as agreed to with the State Water Resources Control Board. And as recently as this past fall, a plan to substitute recycled water in the Los Angeles area for Mono Lake diversions seemed to be moving ahead. But DWP didn't follow through with that. And I provided on the last slide and also now in chat a link to an article on that situation from the Mono Lake Committee. The East Bay area was growing too, and in 1929, the East Bay Utility District began a project to send McCollum River water through mostly buried steel pipelines under the delta, creating the McCollum Aqueduct right here. Later on, they built Pardee and Comanche dams, which I'll show you on a later slide. And by the way, because I live in Lodi, the McCollum River flows about a mile from my house downtown, so many of us on this call share this river. The fact that more rain and snow fell in the northern part of the state than in the south for irrigated agriculture led to the idea of sending Sacramento River water south, and the Central Valley Project, the CVP, was begun with Shasta Dam in 1938 under Roosevelt's New Deal. Here's Shasta Dam up here. And I have also a better map for showing the CVP. It now has more than 270 water contracts for the delivery of as much as 9.5 million acre-feet of water annually. The U.S. Bureau of Reclamation supervisors the CBP, which includes the Bryant-Kern Canal to serve the east side of the Central Valley, and that's down here. And we'll look at that better again later. You can kind of see that the dark blue is Central Valley Project facilities. And the Bureau also owns B.F. Sisk Dam, which is west of Los Banos, over here. And we know it, a lot of us know it as San Luis Dam. It's operated by the Department of Water Resources, DWR, and it serves ag and some urban users in both the Central Valley and in Santa Clara and San Benito counties to the west, out this way. Also during the Depression, work began on the Colorado River Aqueduct to bring Colorado River water to metropolitan Southern California, and that project was delivering water by 1941. That's down here. A couple things about the Colorado River situation. A lot of you know that there's a lot of conflict going on with that. And metropolitan Southern California, as well as the Imperial Valley, is affected. In annual allotments established before 1950, the lower basin states, that's California, Arizona, and Nevada, are supposed to receive 7.5 million acre-feet per year, and the upper basin states, Colorado, Utah, Wyoming, New Mexico, are also supposed to receive 7.5 million acre-feet. That's 15 million acre-feet total. And then additional supplies were later promised to Mexico. Tribal uses, by the way, were never included in allotments. But never since 1930 have flows actually reached 15 million acre-feet. The Colorado River Compact was signed in 1922 when planners didn't have the ability to do accurate long-term flow estimates. And I provided a link to an article that explains the situation and contains a chart showing annual water supply from 1906 to 2023. And the article also has information about how Colorado River water is being used. And then finally, on our table here, in 1960, the state began building the State Water Project, the SWP, to move additional water to the southern Central Valley, but primarily to urban Southern California. And that's the green line here, comes down. And integral to developing this was the development of Delta water facilities, and which I'll get to in more detail later. But keep that green line in mind. I'm attaching a link to Bulletin 76, which was published by DWR in December of 1960. So the same year that this was going forward, they published Bulletin 76, and it says that full demands on the state water resources development system can be met until about 1981 from surplus water in and tributary to the Delta with regulation by the proposed Oroville and San Luis reservoirs. And at that point, Oroville up here hadn't been built yet. San Luis hadn't been built yet. However, upstream depletions will reduce the available surplus supplies, and water will have to be imported from North Coast rivers after that year. So let's take a look now at, no, can't do that one, at Northern California. So in that document I just mentioned, there's a graph showing water sources and uses. And after 1981, meeting demand would require adding in water from the Middle Fork of the Eel River, the Trinity River, the Mad Van Dusen, and the Klamath. And on this map, the green, those are some of the green lines up here. The Klamath is up here. The Middle Fork of the Eel is down this way. So fine, they thought they could draw on that water to supplement the State Water Project, but the California Wild and Scenic Rivers Act, passed in 1972, protected from development all those rivers. So that 5 million acre feet of intended North State water was never developed. So you can't see much detail here. Can't read the text, but I'm going to point out some things to you. Shasta Dam and Trinity Dam are up here, and power facilities. These are both operated by the Central Valley Project, and this is the northernmost part of the CVP. As I mentioned earlier, the CVP has contracts to deliver up to 9.5 million acre feet of water annually. But along the Sacramento River, there are settlement contractors who are entitled to a significant part of that water because they had rights before the CVP was built. And let me see if I can kind of show you where they are. Along the Sacramento River as it comes down, settlement contractors. So they can receive 100% allocations by law, except that in critically dry years, they may agree to reduce diversions to 50% of total contract amounts. And then over to the east here, we have Oroville Dam on the Feather River, which then comes out, meets the Sacramento River north of Sacramento, and it's joined by the American River coming this way from Nimbus Dam, and then all that flows into the Delta. This is a really ambitious storing and moving of water. It's created a demand that nature can't be relied upon to meet, and the result is what has been called paper water. The State Water Resources Control Board's September 2023 draft staff report in support of the Sacramento Delta update to the Bay Delta Plan, I'll explain what that is more later too. It reports that the total water authorized for diversion, that's water that has water rights, from the Sacramento River watershed, which is this whole area up here. This is the Sacramento River watershed. Well, it doesn't include all these, but this area here, the Sacramento River watershed, the total water authorized for diversion is over 5 times the total annual average unimpaired flow for the entire Bay Delta watershed. So that's Sacramento River watershed and the San Joaquin south of this. They promise 5 times as much water as is available. So, interesting, right? Here's the Central Valley, and I'm not going to talk about various diversions that go out this way. Here's the Delta again, the bay, the estuary, and so on. On the southwest end of the Delta, over here, federal and state pumping plants move the water south through the SWP's California Aqueduct, which is operated by DWR, and also through the federal Delta Mendota Canal. And when you're going down Interstate 5 for a while along here, you can see these two transfer systems at the same time. Just look out to the east and you can see them both running pretty near to each other sometimes. They end up at O'Neill Forebay at the base of the San Luis Dam, which is down here. On the west side of I-5, near Los Banos, the San Luis Reservoir holds both state and federal project water. And as I said before, it sends some of it to the Bay Area, the region around Hollister. And then beyond San Luis, the federal and state projects share something called the San Luis Canal, which sends water on south and then separates down here a ways. And there's a branch out here that diverts water to the San Luis Obispo and Santa Barbara area. It's never worked the way it was intended to work. Also part of the federal system, and you can see it on here better, is the Friant-Kern Canal. And that's over here. And it comes down on the east side of the valley, down to Kern County, the Kern River. And it serves growers on the east side of the valley. The San Joaquin River, it comes from behind Friant Dam, which is north of Fresno, up here. And that's a federal, a Central Valley Project facility. The San Joaquin River never naturally provided water to the Central Valley south of Fresno, to this area down here, which is called the Tulare Lake Hydrologic Region. I'll show you that a little later too. Historically, this region was served by rivers in this area, the Cahuilla and the Kern and so on. And only in very wet years did water cover this area. Although that was at one time possible to take a boat from Kern County to San Francisco, you may have heard. The flooding of Tulare Lake in 2023 gives just a hint of what it would have been like on a really wet year and before development began. Let's see here. This past December, the U.S. Supreme Court decided a case in a 10-year battle that pitted Friant water users in the city of Fresno. So we're talking about Friant Kern users in the city of Fresno. It pitted them against the Central Valley, or the Bureau of Reclamation, which had reduced flows during the 2014 to 2015 drought. The court agreed with the argument that beginning in 1939, the Bureau entered into purchase agreements with entities, many of them agricultural interests that previously held rights to San Joaquin River water. So we have exchange contractors, again, people who gave up their rights temporarily to make this system work, but in a really dry year, they don't expect to have to give that water up. And the Supreme Court agreed. Which is interesting because the CVP is also the builder of the Friant system. I'm focusing a lot on agriculture here because agriculture uses about 80% of developed water in California. And I've attached a link to an interesting article that focuses on Fresno County, and it shows how growers and dairy farmers are adapting fairly successfully to changing water, land use, and economic conditions. The exception in terms of successful adaptation to changing conditions appears to be Westland's Water District. That's according to this article. And Westland's Water District is on the west side of Fresno County and the west side of the Central Valley. It's the largest water district in the country, and it relies on Central Valley Project and State Water Project water. When we think about California agriculture, the Central Valley can seem monolithic, but I wanted you to see these pie charts. They show the Central Valley south of the Delta. So the Delta's up here. Here's the Eastern San Joaquin subbasin. These are groundwater basins, is what you're reading about here. And this is from the Public Policy Institute of California, points out that small farms are more prevalent on the valley's east side. And it has these tables that show that over 3/4 of farms in this area are what is called small. That's 1 to 99 acres. Okay. 6% are considered large, over 500 acres. Okay, so that's farm size. But when you look at cropped acreage, this 77% of farms has 14% of cropped acreage, and the 6% has 58% of cropped acreage. So what you have is you have a lot of small farms in some areas, and down here, especially in this area, you have a lot of very large farms. Another thing, well, yeah. So I think it's interesting to see that the Central Valley, or this part of the valley south of the Delta, is not uniform when it comes to size of farms. There's a lot of variation. In a July 2025 report on agricultural land reform in California, a group called the Community Alliance with Family Farmers, that's CAFF, reports that California's agricultural land is rapidly consolidating and transitioning to the point where private investment firms, hedge funds, and non-agricultural operators control over 40% of California's cropland. This affects access to water by smaller growers, and it also affects rural economies and biological diversity. And it perpetuates historical land theft, according to CAF, and discriminatory policies affecting farmers who are Black, Indigenous, and people of color. And I provided a link to that report. Meanwhile, innovative climate and water-conscious farming practices aren't getting enough attention outside of ag areas. Okay, let's look at Southern California here. So State Water Project water gets pumped over the Tehachapies, further south along branches of the California Aqueduct. The East Branch goes over here along the west side of the Mojave Desert. The southwest part of California, including San Diego County down here, relies on some groundwater and regional river water, but mostly on water coming down through two Los Angeles aqueducts. There are two of them now, through the SWP California Aqueduct down this way, and then also from the Colorado River Aqueduct down here. The Imperial Valley gets water for agriculture from the Colorado River, but not through any of these systems. Since the topic here is where California water comes from and where it goes, I'm not going to discuss water management in Southern California, which is a huge topic. I will point out, though, that in January of 2025, the Metropolitan Water District of Southern California reported that Southern Californians have reduced their per-person potable water use by 45% since 1990. MWD has 26 member water agencies, delivers water supplies directly or indirectly to about 19 million people, and it's the largest recipient of State Water Project water. But the other big recipient of State Water Project water is Kern County up here. All right, let's look at the Delta. more closely. So if we take a closer look at it, we can see not only that the Sacramento and San Joaquin rivers come together here, um, with all their tributary water and so on, but that it is crossed again by what we already saw, the Hetch Hetchy Aqueduct, the McCollum Aqueduct. We've got the Merced and Chowchilla rivers feeding into the San Joaquin here. We've got water coming directly from the Calaveras River and the Cosumnes up this way. And all these move water through this region. 150 years ago, of course, all this water would have flowed out through the estuary, the health of which still relies on adequate flows. And I think you all know that transferring water across the delta for 60 years has increased salinity. It's raised water temperatures, led to fish extinctions, massive salmon declines. It's hurt California's fishing industry and harmed subsistence fishing. It's interfered with tribal water uses, and it's interfered with farming in the delta. And you can't keep salt water from moving east through the estuary if you don't have adequate outgoing flows. And that salinity even impacts those who depend on water transfers in other parts of the state. So I wanted to talk about three processes that are exacerbating problems in the Delta right now. The State Water Board knew as far back as 1978 that they needed a plan to meet water quality and flow objectives in the Delta to control salinity, both for in-Delta uses and for the ecosystem. But implementing the plan has always been unpopular because sometimes Delta exports south of the Delta need to be reduced to meet these objectives. The plan to protect beneficial uses was supposed to be updated regularly, but it hasn't been. The Water Board did come up with a plan based on managing a percentage of natural flows in tributaries, but agriculture and urban users reliant on the tributaries, and that includes Bay Area urban users, wanted to come up with their own management plans, which they called voluntary agreements, or VAs. They now call this a Healthy Rivers and Landscapes Plan. Agencies like the SFPUC that resist a plan to control flows are overestimating demand to support their case. And I think it could be shown that a lot of other agencies that prefer Healthy Rivers and Landscapes Plan have demand estimates that others would question, like environmental advocates and tribes. And by the way, tribes are speaking with an increasingly loud voice in California water matters these days. It's interesting to see some of the things that are going forward. These groups aren't happy with the Healthy Rivers and Landscapes Plan. That matters still being negotiated. The second process going forward is the effort to build a 40-mile tunnel under the Delta, which is sort of, I can't see it because of where the screen is showing people, but it's sort of over this way. 40-mile tunnel, it's been touted for years as the most efficient way to move seasonal flows from the federal and state water projects in the north. It's hard to estimate what to expect of flows given climate change. The tunnel will take at least 10 years to build. That's not disputed by anybody. It will ruin a couple of towns. Yeah, nobody's really disputing that. Agriculture and the ecosystem in the northern delta will be damaged, and one estimate says it will cost up to $100 billion. It isn't clear where that money would come from. One of the major beneficiaries of State Water Project water, the Metropolitan Water District of Southern California, has made only a tentative commitment to moving forward with this because costs would have to be covered in part by urban ratepayers, although the primary beneficiaries of the project would be growers in the southern Central Valley. A metropolitan would get water, but growers would get a lot of water also. In 2009, the legislature passed the Delta Reform Act that established co-equal goals of water supply reliability and ecosystem resiliency to be pursued while protecting the Delta itself as an evolving place. It's hard to argue that the tunnel project can adequately meet requirements for Delta protections. The issue of consistency with the Delta Plan will probably underlie any effort by the State League to take a position on Delta conveyance. The League doesn't have a position for or against it, but the measures we support for protecting the Delta are not measures that have ever so far been met. One more thing going on with this, a common complaint from agricultural interests about attempts to manage flows to protect the Delta is that it prioritizes fish over people. At the end of January of this year, the Trump administration issued a presidential memorandum titled Putting People Over Fish. This was followed by an executive order that was framed as a response to the January 2025 Southern California wildfires. The executive order gives the Secretary of the Interior discretionary authority to operate the federal CVP, to deliver more water, and requires the Bureau of Reclamation to prevent California agencies, such as DWR, from interfering with maximizing deliveries. DWR and the CVP have a long history of cooperating on California water management, and DWR has already sent a letter listing potential legal challenges to this executive order. I provided a link to that. However, agricultural interests in the Southern Central Valley have written voicing enthusiastic support for the order, which is called Action 5. Three conservative or conservation organizations, the Center for Biological Diversity, San Francisco Baykeeper, and Friends of the River have already sued the Trump administration for violating the Endangered Species Act by pumping excessive amounts of water out of the Delta. One bright spot in the water management situation is a bill introduced by State Senator Jerry McNerney that would safeguard both the Delta and the State Water Project. This bill, SB 872, would move $300 million of Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund budget appropriations annually for 20 years to DWR to restore existing SWP conveyance impacted by land subsidence. And there's a lot of that down this way. Down the valley where we have groundwater overdraft, we have land subsidence, tunnels or canals have collapsed, and it was a big problem. For example, for the Frank Kern Canal, in places they cannot even access that water because of subsidence. But this would also be used to improve existing Delta levees, and no funds could be spent on Delta conveyance facilities. This bill by Senator McNerney is supported by both Restore the Delta and the state water contractors, and I got to tell you, that's pretty much unheard of for them to agree about anything. A bill passed last year and signed by Governor Newsom established a requirement that the California Water Plan identify 9 million acre-feet of additional water supply by 2040 to address anticipated losses from rising temperatures. It includes things like developing new surface and groundwater storage facilities, water conservation, recycling, stormwater capture, desal, improved conveyance, water transfers, and demand management strategies. It's a big bill, covers a lot of ground. One commenter on it noted that after DWR rigorously analyzes the needs of the different watersheds, the need will be less than the target of 9 million acre-feet established in the statute. And in fact, it looks like California may be overestimating upcoming demand for water by both urban and agricultural users. The Urban Water Management Plan Task Force, working with our League of Women Voters of California Water team, reports that droughts correlate with reduced demand that now appears to be largely sustained after a drought. So you get a reduced demand with the drought and it stays reduced. That happens for several reasons. First, long-term water efficiency standards work their way through the existing urban water infrastructure, like low-flow toilets, shower heads, and so on. People use less water for landscaping. People take out lawns and thirsty vegetation. And third, water service costs more, so customers use less. Meanwhile, as noted above, many agricultural users are adapting their water use without reducing productivity. Okay, let's take a look now at the situation with groundwater. And this is, I did cover this before. California is heavily reliant on surface water moved around, but 40% of our water has come from groundwater, and it is overdrafted almost everywhere that it has been relied on. If you remember the map that has all the green area in California, notice that the irrigated area on that map is also the area with the greatest groundwater overdraft. Of course, it's green up and down, but there's a lot of green down this way. The 2014 Sustainable Groundwater Management Act, SGMA, is dealing with this, although critically overdrafted basins have until 2040 to become sustainable. Meanwhile, land subsides, canals sink, like, as I mentioned, the Frank Kern Canal over on the east side of the valley, and don't work the way they're supposed to, and drinking water also becomes inaccessible or unusable for many people in the Central Valley who rely on it. And there's a big problem with drinking water quality in this area. We certainly don't have time to go into that, but you only have to look at maps to see that the highest demand for transferred surface water is in the most heavily overdrafted areas, which are basically desert. Earlier, I mentioned hydrologic regions. Here you can see the San Joaquin and Tulare hydrologic regions. And the San Joaquin River hydrologic region actually ends just south of Fresno. And then this is the Tulare Lake hydrologic region. A recent post on SJV Water, which is the best source of information on what's going on in this region, presents the case for excluding small pumpers from groundwater regulations. And large pumpers are not happy with that idea, but the argument is that small farmers have far less impact on the groundwater situation. The article refers to a statement that about 44% of groundwater pumpers in the Tulare Lake subbasin, which covers most of Kings County, and 49% of pumpers in the neighboring Tule subbasin are extracting fewer than 20 acre-feet of groundwater annually. That makes up about 1% of water usage in each region. I'm including one more fun link, which I can't show you, but I do take a look at it. The last link that I've sent. It's from Stanford's Water in the West. You may already have seen it, but if you're not, you must. It shows how much more water can be stored in groundwater basins than in surface storage. And besides, there's no evaporation with groundwater storage. And I think this might convince you that we don't need to build any more dams. But building more dams and moving water, as we always have, are the strategies that have the most financial and political support, and that's true right across the political spectrum. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and I'll just run through these last slides just so they can be part of whatever presentation you are recording, although you won't have time to read any of them. I understand that, but at least they're here. But they should be in chat. I guess they're in chat also. Okay, so that's all. I will stop sharing, and that's it. So, questions?
I'll start.
Okay, Ruby?
Or Ruby, I'll start. Okay.
So great. Bob and I met Jane. She probably doesn't remember because she's met so many people. But
I do remember you.
yeah, when was that?
I don't remember that.
2010 or something like that.
Probably,
Way
yeah.
back. And it's great, to see you just charging along, still the expert on all of these water matters, which are mattering to us. But why is it that people prefer not to store all of the water that runs off as the melted snow into the ocean, into these, I guess, numerous empty spaces that could be used to, as artificial aquifers? Why? At one point, there was a big campaign to try to get ideas. They solicited ideas from concerned scientists, I guess, to develop a program for this significant storage. But nothing, I guess nothing ever came of that.
Well, nothing's come of it yet. And one of the problems is that the area underground is sort of like the area above ground. It does this, And the layers are not uniform from one area to another, and water can get down through some and not through all kinds of layers. So you really have to analyze what you have going on underground before you can do anything. I will say that the bill signed last year that wanted to identify 9 million acre feet of additional water supply. One of the things that they are calling for is groundwater storage facilities and making more of an effort to figure out how to get water underground. And also, it's nice to know that the California Water Commission also is behind that approach, has expressed some real support for the idea of increasing groundwater storage. So I think people are going to be working on it more now than have in the past.
So would it help if, people lobbied for this?
Never
People like
hurts.
to leave.
Never hurts. I'm not sure. I don't know myself which areas are good for recharge. Because again, what's happening underground varies so much, but there are also um, you can map that from high in the sky these days. It's possible to identify the situation underground in ways that weren't possible, even 5 years ago.
Absolutely, yeah.
I think we'll be able to get a picture of what's going on in those areas and figure out where we can put more water back in. One problem, though, for example, in the areas in the southern Central Valley where land has severely subsided, some of you may have seen that picture of subsidence from 1925 to like 2015 or something like that. It's something like 30 feet. It's huge, you know.
Yeah.
And when you have too much subsidence, then apparently you can't get water back underground. So we have to figure out how to deal with that before we've overdrafted the aquifers so badly that they can't be fixed. It's a good question, though. Anyone else? Carol, do I see your hand?
Yes.
Yeah.
What effect do earthquakes have on the water supply? Question one. And another one is how much fracking is now being done? I know it uses a lot of water is still being done, and how does that affect the water supply?
I don't know very much about fracking, or how much is being done. I think more of it is being done again, frankly, in the southern Central Valley and in Southern California, than any place else I know of, although anybody feel free to correct me on that one. There are other problems. There are problems with uh, oil extraction byproducts, not just from fracking, but just getting into soils used for agriculture and so on. And it's something that one of the people on our water committee would especially like us to take a look at. As far as earthquakes go, that's really interesting. But one, of course, that's one of the arguments for tunnels, a tunnel under the delta is, well, we could have an earthquake out there. We haven't ever had an earthquake affect that area. It doesn't mean it wouldn't happen. But a bigger problem probably is that the San Andreas Fault kind of runs parallel to those um, canals, the state and federal
Yep.
water projects that run down the west side of the Central Valley. I understand that the San Andreas Fault kind of runs through that same area. And so you have maybe as much chance that an earthquake would affect transfer infrastructure as you do that it would affect the delta. Anyone else? Sophia, but you're muted. Okay, good.
Hi. I was wondering, I know you touched on this a little bit, but I was wondering how hatcheries affect like the water, especially coming from like the Sacramento and San Joaquin rivers, and like is there any legislature on the topic?
Excuse me, what affects that water?
Hatcheries?
Hatcheries.
Fish hatcheries.
Are you suggesting that hatcheries are releasing things that contaminate the water?
Well, I was just wondering because we're learning about them right now. I'm in environmental science, and so
Uh-huh.
I was just wondering if they had them because you were noting like dams, and so um aren't hatcheries built near dams to mitigate like
Yes, yes, they are. And the two I know about, one is by Nimbus on the American up east of Sacramento, and the other is on the McCollum River. East Bay Mud operates a fish hatchery that has been very successful. And you can go up there and watch the salmon in different stages of development, and then they pack them all into giant tank trucks and take them out of the delta and release them, and they figured out the best places to release them. So yes, there are hatcheries that are working on preserving salmon, and some of them have been pretty successful. Anyone else?
What is the issue? Well, is there still a movement, and what do you think of it if there is, about removing the dams that we still have?
Oh, that's so interesting. I've been reading that more dams are coming out than are being built anymore nationwide. Have you read that?
No.
Mm.
Amazing. Yes, dams are coming out in all kinds of places. And of course, we know about what happened up on the Klamath, which appears to have been quite successful. Salmon are already going back where salmon haven't been for 100 years. It's really exciting, right? Um, I I don't know how many more dams are up for removal in California, but I do think that it seems to me that there's not the kind of support for dams that there has been in the past. They silt up, you know. An exception is the situation with Sites Reservoir, where they're moving right ahead to build a reservoir up there. Um, but I think that's now kind of the exception rather than the rule. What do you think, Carol?
By the way, I have Jeanette Cernicki with me, who used to
Oh, hi.
have your.
My
I,
father was,
I should have recognized you.
yes, my father was the one who did that.
What's that?
He
My-
worked, and her father helped build
Yes, build that.
original thing,
Yes.
the first thing that you showed us.
Oh, Shasta Dam.
Yes.
Really? Oh, wow. Well, Shasta's not going anywhere. And of course, there are people who want to raise Shasta Dam, but the Winnemucca people are very much opposed to that. It will flood the rest of their
Right.
tribal lands. And so I don't know what will happen with that. Of course, under the present administration,
Yes.
And you know, the other thing about, I mean, I think about dams as storing water, but a lot of the dams up in the Sierras also are used to generate power. And a lot of dams anyway are used to generate power, but some of the ones in the mountains were built for as much for that purpose as to store water. So, you know, we still need that power generation, I guess. So it's another part of the complex system. Anyone else?
So, with respect to San Diego, I understood that desalinization was supposed to help alleviate this depletion of the Colorado River system. Is that still true, or what's
I
going
have
on with
that.
since you know places like Singapore evidently rely on desalinization
I
for
have
fresh
not
water?
heard anything about desalinization on the Colorado River, but the article that is linked should be in chat.
Mhm.
Um, we'll probably talk about that, but I don't know anything about that. Sorry.
Well, it's such a huge subject, very complex.
Yeah, it
Yeah,
is. And you get on, you think you get on top of one part of it, and then some little piece changes and everything goes a different direction, and it's crazy.
right. No,
Yeah.
I mean, and this is a tangent, but um, you know, time marches on, progress is made in various fields, and so just as a plug for a family member, one of my nephews is working. He's a seismologist, and he works on improving systems for tracking earthquakes. And evidently, all of these fiber optic cables that are no longer used, and apparently there are really a lot of them. So he and his team at Lawrence Livermore were using them to connect them up into this microgrid to assess the earthquake activity. So, I
Wow.
mean, this is off topic really, but it was meant to illustrate that, you know, there are all these myriad, well, maybe reducing now because of the cuts, but research going on that someday could make more feasible these various things that are now thought to be worthless. But,
Right.
you know, it's a matter of connecting all of the advances that will possibly enable um, undreamt of possibilities to become real.
I think you're right. I just saw today a contract application in San Joaquin County for the Eastern San Joaquin Subbasin, the managing group for that. And it was submitted, the contract proposal was submitted by a group that's worked with four groundwater sustainability agencies already in this subbasin. And when I looked at the kinds of analysis that they do to help manage water, I was really surprised. You know, I think that there's a lot of expertise out there to
Sure.
improve things.
Yeah.
And some of it involves technology we never thought of, you know, and I
Right.
think there are improvements that can be made. So, you know, I'm hopeful about that. And I'm
Mhm.
also optimistic about some of the developments with regenerative agriculture, some of the things
Mhm.
that are being done by smaller growers, frankly, in different parts of the state. I think there's a lot of energy and enthusiasm and ideas there, and we don't necessarily hear about that.
Yeah.
You alluded in part of your talk to, I answered my question about it. It's the US Supreme Court you were referring to, not the state Supreme Court. So you alluded to some of the requirements that and laws that they're passing that affect California. How smooth is the cooperation between feds and the state? I mean, we have already have state and state, northern and southern, and um, that's complex. And then how does that all work in terms of managing all these water issues?
Well, the best recent answer I've seen to that has to do with that Action 5, which was the Trump administration's memorandum about that started out with putting people over fish. But that's the one where it requires the Bureau of Reclamation to prevent California agencies such as DWR from interfering with maximizing deliveries. So, and for that one, for sure, there's a real disconnect between what California management has typically involved and what the federal government now might like to do. And the other one, of course, is SACID. And that's been a problem nationwide. There have been places all over the country who felt that the changes to the Waters of the U.S. Decision was unfortunate. And I think that's one of the things actually that's also been discussed by the LWVUS water team. So yeah, that's troubling when things move in that direction. But we do have, again, we have this legislation that's moving forward in California to codify some of the laws that we relied on before, make them part of California law. And then we wouldn't be relying on waters of the US determinations at the federal level.
Thank
Every place we can do that, it's probably worthwhile.
Um, and another thing I've always been curious about. I understand that DWR, so it sounds like, it's kind of politically powerful. And how can this utility, I mean, it must be huge, but there's probably a very interesting story or history of this agency and how it's able to, sometimes it seems to subvert the best interests of people it's supposed to serve. Or this is the impression I get from, people who, well, another nephew of mine who works in politics in Southern California, he speaks of it, as if it's kind of just overly powerful, given, they're not elected, right?
Right. Yeah, I would not contradict him on that. This is part of the problem with the system we have, is that so many agencies have developed to manage it, to try and make it work. And then they generate other agencies and sub-agencies and advisory committees and so on and so forth, and it all becomes very complicated. But the other piece of it, and I'm not saying this is true of DWR necessarily, but politically, the people who are perpetuating the systems we have for storing and moving water are very powerful politically, and they have a lot of money. So yeah, DWR, they've very closely connected to the State Water Project and the state water contractors, very closely connected. Well, anybody else have any questions? I want to thank you for letting me carry on like this. My family just has to listen to me carry on. But when I'm around people who are interested, it's a lot more fun. So a lot more interesting.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very, very much. Yeah.
Okay. And one of you, I'm sure, will end this call for us, right?
Yes.
Okay, very good. Thanks a lot.
We appreciate your being here. Great. Thank you.